Hello, so today we're going to be looking at something I've seen posted online and I've seen questions on this. It's basically setting up your high gain patch for sort of metalcore, that kind of vibe. And I'm going to show some tricks, tips, and a sort of walkthrough and a basic kind of patch setup so that you have all the tools at your disposal to make your own kind of tones and an easy way of looking at things. So here we are within Fractal Edit. I'm doing this on my FM3. We're going to be using quick build here, an in and an out. Going to connect those two together. And then we're going to add an amp and a cab, smack bang in the middle. And then we're going to add a filter block at the start. We'll get to that in a bit, but I'm using this as a clean boost. And then we're going to use a noise gate after the amp and cab, and I'll get to the multiband comp later, which for me is like the secret weapon, the secret sauce for a lot of these really tight high gain tones that we get out of the Fractal unit. So we'll actually start with the cab block, because I think that's actually one of the most important parts or the ingredients of this build, because it really shapes the tone of what you're getting out of the speakers. And then the amp's going to be the sort of feel and response, if that makes sense. So within the cab block, there's obviously a lot of options that you can choose from. In this instance, we're going to be going for an ML cab, and yes, that's made by ML Sound Labs. And we're going to be using their Euro cab that's within the Fractal unit. So Euro 57 C1, and on the other side, same thing, ML. I'm going to be using the Euro 121 over there. We're going to add a low cut and a high cut to both of these, of 80 Hertz for the low cut, and then 10,000 or 10K for the high cut. And the thinking here is that we're going to clean up the sort of low end, the sort of really low rumble, I guess, that you don't really need in the guitar tone, especially in the full mix, and then take out some of those high highs, if that's a proper word. And so for the amp, most of the time we'll start off with something that most people might go for, they might know from other modelers, and that would be the 5153. In this case, we'll take the 5153 red, and these are the stock settings when you load it up into the cab, and this is what it would sound like. So a few things there. It's probably a bit flubby, I guess is the word that you'd use, and this is where the boost comes in. So on the filter block, what we're going to be doing is, first of all, we're going to activate it, and we're going to add, let's try an 8 dB level boost. And what I find really helps is also using the low cut and the high cut going into the amp. So we'll take a low cut again of 80 Hertz and then a high cut of 10,000. This is with my Ibanez that's tuned in drop B with pretty high output pickups. So I've reduced the gain a bit and we've tweaked the EQ. So I've lowered the bass a bit here now. We've upped the mids to 7, treble at 6, and we're at -9 on level, which is a bit more, I guess, output or level in the preset, so you'll hear it better. I haven't changed the cab. The filter block is still at 8 dB boost with these low and high cut, and this is what that sounds like. We haven't addressed the noise gate just yet, so we're going to place the noise gate after the amp and cab, and we're going to set it up so it really clamps down and turns off, almost like it turns off the guitar or the noise between, say, chug notes or really tight percussive parts. And you can do this a bit like the Zool with like a key input on the Fractal unit, which is really amazing, I think. And by doing that, we can basically say for the gate to look at the guitar output, like straight at the input of the Fractal unit. So that way it's not, you don't have to set it against the noise floor of like the amp and cab, and it's going to really react to the guitar signal straight into the front end of the Fractal unit. So to do that, we set the sidechain source to input 1, where our guitar is going in. And then for the rest of the settings, we want it to completely turn off or silence whatever's coming out when we're muting. So for that, we set the attenuation to -80. We want this as quick as possible, so we set the attack time to 1 ms, the hold time to the minimum, which is 1 as well, and the release time to 1. And the only thing you have to set in this case is the threshold. So depending on your guitar and how you like it, you can set it to wherever you like. I find typically around -50 seems to work well, but maybe it's different for you. Now, as you can hear that it's kind of opening again, and there's a tweak here that can really help out. It's the low and high cut of the sidechain source. So we'll do the same thing. We'll set the low cut to 80, and we'll set the the high cut even lower. So basically it's listening to a certain range of the guitar, or at least in terms of frequency. So it'll be even more aggressive in how it's shutting down or clamping down on your guitar between, say, chugs and notes. Set this to around 3K, seems to work quite well. And now the secret sauce, or pro tip, we're going to be adding a multi-band compressor, which really, really helps on these sorts of tones because it controls the sort of lower mids, so your guitar tone doesn't sound as, I guess, bloated or pushed in that area, and it cleans it up, and then you get a really tight, clear, percussive kind of tone, if you like that. You can go to a quick build again, or you can right-click, and you go down to multi-band comp right there. These are the stock settings when you add it in for the first time. First thing you want to do is to zero out the levels on each of them, because otherwise you're going to be boosting your signal quite a bit going into the output of your FM3, FM9 or Axe FX. And then we only want it to be affecting the lower mid region. Between, say, 100 and 300, that's probably a good way to start. So to turn off the low and the high compressor ranges, we set the threshold to 20, nice and easy, and then leave it at that. So when we're playing, it's only going to be affecting the mid in the middle. So we see it's already affecting the mid-range, or the lower mids in this case. So now we just have to set the crossover so that it's only affecting that small range of that low mids kind of build up. So we set the crossover in the middle to 100. We set the high crossover to, let's say 300 in this case. And we'll set the release to 25. So we'll pull this knob down to around 25. Quick tip, if you want a more precise value, if you hold Control and then drag the knob, you'll get sort of finer values, and we can get it to exactly 25, but around 25 is good. We'll leave the attack at 10, and we'll try it with the threshold at -30 to see how that sounds like. I'll play the same. So you can see it's reacting to the chugs and pulling down that lower mid build-up, and so you get a clearer tone. I'll do a back-to-back with the multi-compressor off and on so you can hear the difference. And the only thing is to dial in the threshold to taste. Maybe you're cutting off, it's too much, you're cutting off too much of those low mids to your liking. You can pull the threshold up to pull out less of those low mids. So it really depends on taste, guitar using, things like that. I tend to settle on a value between -26 and -28, depending on the sort of cab that we're using and also the sort of tones that we're getting out of the amp. So this is at -26. So it's really cleaned up the sort of lower mids. So the thing I really wanted to show here is that when you're dialing in like your high gain tone or your metal tone, and you're kind of wondering, or you're a bit lost when you're looking at the sheer amount of amps that are on offer, what I find really helpful is if you set up a basic chain to start with. So in this case, we're going to stick with this cab, the gate, that's going to stay as is, and we're going to keep the multi-band compressor on there as well, and the boost out front. And then after that, all we have to do is go to the amp block, and then we can audition different amps. If you want to take it a step further, you can add a looper block right in front and then see how that sounds. But to get a real idea of the feel of an amp, I find it's always more fun and better to just audition each amp and then play a bit each time. And then afterwards, you just change the EQ and the gain presence on the amp itself, and you've already got your basic setup that's there. And that way you can quickly audition different amps to see if the kind of gain structure is to your liking and the feel and response is nice. I'll give an example of that. So we'll go to types, and here are all our amps. A quick tip, if we click this pin button, it pins this window open. So that way if I select a different amp, it'll be the stock settings of the amp, but it's not going to close this window. So all those settings are the same, and I can click through different amps and we'll get an idea of what they might sound like. So obviously there's a ton of amps in there, but by doing that, you can get an idea of the feel, or the general feel of an amp through the same cab, and all those other settings, they stay the same. And then afterwards, when you find an amp in terms of feel that you like, you can keep the amp loaded and then mess around with the gain and the EQ to dial it into your liking. So in good cooking show tradition, here's one I baked earlier, and it's a preset that you can download as well. So I put the link in the description below. And what it is, it's basically this setup with different amps that I've also dialed in. And the way I've done it is I've got 4 amps on each of the channels, going from, I guess, more scooped to more mid-forward on each of the channels. And I've set this up with each scene. So each scene, as you see, we get a different amp, but everything else stays the same. So the boost, the cab block, gate, multiband compressor stays the same. I've added a delay block as well. So scenes 5 through 8 are the equivalent amps, but with the delay enabled, and some other tricks as well. So in this case, for example, on the second scene, when I switch to scene 6, it's going to turn off the gate and the multiband compressor, turns on the delay, and as for a bit of fun, in the filter block, I've added a slight mid boost, which you can hardly see here. So it's channel B on the filter block. So I'll do a quick playthrough of each of the 4 scenes so you get an idea of the sort of gain and amps that you're going to get. So hopefully that was a good overview of the sort of tools that you have at your disposal within the unit to really dial in the sort of high gain, gated, percussive tone that you might be after. As said, there's so many options you can look at and things you can try out, so don't be afraid to experiment. In any case, if this was useful, please drop a like and subscribe. It really helps me out. Thanks a lot.